Welcome back to the LaunchFamily Podcast, where we sit down with parents, thinkers, and builders who are asking the hard questions about what it really means to raise kids in today's world. I'm your host, Jessica Shelley, mom of 7, former educator, and co-founder of LaunchFamily. Today's conversation is a big one. My guest is Wylde Scott, author, creator, father, and the mind behind the Wylde Scott children's character universe. Wylde has spent decades working across storytelling, education, and creativity, and his work today is focused on one urgent question. How do we raise children to stay human in a world shaped by AI, speed, and constant comparison? This episode isn't about fear. It's about responsibility, imagination, and the window of opportunity parents still have while our kids are young. Wylde, I'm so glad to have you on the show, and what a timely conversation.
Hi, Jessica. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Yes. Okay, so we need a little bit more background. You normally write children's stories, and you just released your first book for parents. So why this book and why now?
So I've been passionate about the imagination for many, many, many years. But we're, as an entire society, about to go through one of the biggest changes, one of the biggest transformations in probably 3 generations, right? A once-in-a-lifetime transformation. And everything is about to change. Artificial intelligence will basically touch, everything we see, everything we feel will be in some form based on artificial intelligence. So it's a massive transformation. And the world that our children are going to live in is going to be a very different world than the world that we were raised in. So it became very important for me to talk to parents about the fact that the world, A, is going to change, that B, it's going to require an entirely different set of skill sets, and C, that we actually have the ability to prepare our children for the world that they are about to inherit. And so I'm very excited about this mission, very excited about the journey. And the book is meant to help parents understand what those changes are and what do we do about it.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for that clarity. I now have another question. So in your view, what should our primary goal be as parents? Like with this big shift that's coming and that we're experiencing day in and day out, actually right now, it's that we're living through that transition.
Yeah,
What should our goal be as parents?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think more than anything, the goal doesn't really change, right? The goal is to develop happy, healthy, mentally healthy children with empathy and kindness and skill sets, right? And the skill sets, we want them to be able to participate, to be healthy participants in the world that they're going to be part of, right? That's the goal. And that core doesn't really change. What changes is the world that they're about to inherit, right? So for us, it's about understanding what is going to change and developing the skill sets that they will need to participate in their world and be happy, healthy, productive citizens. And there's a little bit of a change that's going to happen, and we can talk about that as we go through this interview, but there's going to be a change to where children need to focus on purpose and value and human connection. And that may sound counterproductive or maybe just inherent in the conversation, but it actually becomes an effort to maintain purpose, value, and human connection in the world that is coming for our children.
You put that into perspective there too, because it is like that change, I guess, sort of piece. So what does that change look like in the day-to-day? Like what is actually physically changing about how we're raising our children now than when maybe we were raised?
Um,
That's affecting those things.
yeah, I think in particular with let's say our current environment and the way we raise children, in many ways, I think is moving in the wrong direction, right? There's a lot of conversation amongst parents and educators, the conversations around homeschooling and all different attitudes as to what should be happening with children, right? And I think the stuff we're not doing right is we're not necessarily raising our children to be these amazing adults that will be successful in the world, because during really essential stages in life, we have removed things like imagination and play and curiosity and things that are absolutely vital to the development of a child. And we've replaced that with basically educational systems for the majority of the population, where they sit at desk for long periods of time. We cram an amazing amount of information into their little minds, some of which they'll use, some of which they won't use at all at any time in their life. And we've created a path of conformity, right? This one kind of linear model. And it's not what children need. So what's changing is, as the world changes, the first stage right now that we're already seeing is that the advent of cell phones has simply added another bad twist, in my opinion. So we're going from sitting them down at a desk for hours on end to actually adding the fact that they're staring into devices for more and more hours. So hours and hours and hours sitting, staring into portals. And that is detrimental to childhood altogether, and detrimental to the development of their minds, the development of their mental health, all kinds of things. So what's going to change is that the advent of artificial intelligence, in my opinion, is going to create two divergent paths. And one is, kind of a danger, and the other is an opportunity, right? For all of us in society and all parents. And one path is the path of, kind of continuing down what we're doing today, which is we continue to keep them at desks, we continue to let them stare into portals, we continue to addict them to devices, and eventually they lose the ability to imagine, the ability to think, the ability to create, and worst of all is they lose the foundations of human connection. The other path is that we spend an unbelievable amount of time, just like we would today with math or science or STEM, developing a totally different mental framework, one that is based in imagination, creativity, connection, curiosity, all these different things, and above all, human connection. We need to build children that are essentially reliant on their connections with other human beings. And we need to do this actively and purposely, and we need to parent with intent if we're going to do a good job for our children in the next generation.
Absolutely. I mean, it's showing up everywhere too, right? Like you can't even go to a restaurant anymore without talking to like an AI order taker, whatever you want to do there. So it's only going to be more pervasive as AI continues to grow and new technology continues to advance, right? So I love that you center that in, even how our experiences, millennials, Gen X, Gen Z, like all of these people that are having kids or raising children or in different stages, right? Like we were raised on that emergence of technology. And now what we're seeing is this shift towards like the dependence on technology. Um, I have another like question, I guess, which would be more related to our like the parental consumption of this, right? Like if our kids are seeing us having to work on our phone or on Zoom calls instead of meeting friends at a restaurant or something, like how does what we do as parents then affect what our kids see as normal in that sense too?
So it's a great question, and it's just so unintentional, right? So much of what happened, and I don't think any parent does any of this on purpose, right? All of us intend to be fantastic parents, right? But uh, unfortunately, it's not just children, right, that are addicted to their cell phones. I mean, we've just adjusted as a society to the point where if we have 5 minutes, we pick up the cell phone. And it's a mechanism of entertainment. It's a mechanism of distraction. It's a mechanism, quite honestly, of mental health. We need a break for 5 minutes. But the problem is we've replaced so many other things in life with picking up a cell phone for 10 minutes, right? So two things are happening from that. One, honestly, we're not being the greatest parents when we're doing that because our focus goes away from our children. And I talk about it in my book a lot, but essentially we only have a very short period of time to really build deep connections with our children. And that ends, in my opinion, around the ages of 10 to 12, where we have massive amounts of time where they're dedicated to us and not dedicated to the outside world. And so for every minute that we're picking up the phone, where there's a child in the room, we're actually losing an opportunity, number one, to connect with our children. Number two, as you point out, we're teaching them, we're normalizing it for them as well, right? We're normalizing the situation for them where if you have 5 minutes, you pick up the phone or you look into a device, you stare into a portal. And quite honestly, I don't think parents, even us as adults, we don't realize how bad that actually is for us. and how addicting it's becoming, because many of us will pick up a phone with the intention of doing 5 minutes, and the next thing we know, we've lost an hour. And so our children are picking up the same habits. So it's kind of universal, and it's kind of global, and it's very understandable. But at the same time, this is an urgent call, because artificial intelligence is 10 times more powerful than what we see on phones today. And we will absolutely lose all human connection, and quite honestly, we'll lose the ability to think and imagine if all we do as an entire society is pick up a phone every time we've got 5 minutes.
How does that, I mean, now I'm wondering about like those rooted things like attention, identity, resilience. How does that, like, constant stimulation of like, oh, I have 5 minutes, I'm going to pick up my phone. How does that affect those like inner workings of humanness, I guess, in the long
So,
run?
oh, I could go on for 3 hours on this conversation, right? So basically, we're losing the idea of what it means to be human and the idea of human connection, right? So first, the device becomes our number one contact to the world, right? Like, the device becomes our emotional support. Think about that. Rather than turning to another human being, or turning to your friend or your spouse, or a human being that is going to help you through a moment of stress or just distraction, entertainment, whatever it is, we are becoming completely dependent on a device. And that's becoming basic human nature now. So human nature is to pick up a device. So that's destructive, right? The other thing is, it's terrible for our mental states, right? And I can give you 1,000 different examples, but from a mental perspective, um, we can talk about, kind of how all of these social media programs and all of the games and all of the applications were designed. But basically, the design for basically what we do is our scrolling, right? Short bursts of attention and instant gratification. And both of those destroy long-term thinking, imagination, creativity. You are training your brain. And that's a lot of what I dive into in the book, is what actually happens within the brain during these cycles. And so, quite unintentionally, all of us, right? It's not with intention on our part. We just need a break. We just need 5 minutes on the phone. We are destroying our ability to think deeply. We're destroying our attention. We're destroying our creativity. We're destroying so many things at once just by becoming completely dependent on the phone for our mental state. And that's it in a nutshell. We're becoming dependent on the phone for our mental states.
Okay, so now like the teacher part of me, I'm like, oh, I'm thinking back to my classroom and like the apps that we had our students use, like, oh my goodness, the multitude of things, right? Like the educational perspective there. And one word that kind of jumps out is stamina. Like we would always talk about our reading stamina or math stamina. Like we're talking right now about like our mental stamina, right? Like our attention stamina. Like how are we actually gonna grow things if everything keeps getting like shorter, guys? Focused on entertainment, engagement, blah, 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 blah. It's the distraction piece, right? So when it comes to educational settings, because I have a bunch of kiddos, my mind is already going towards that lens of, okay, well, something then has to kind of shift in traditional ed because we can't keep having these apps that are gonna suck them in and not actually give them that value or that how are we building creative stamina or like the curiosity, right? So one of the claims that you make is that traditional educational models no longer prepare kids for the future. So I want to break that up a little bit. So can you give some more context to what that means?
Yeah, so I've become incredibly passionate about educational environments, right? And I like to refer to it as an environment, because I'm not necessarily partial to whether, I believe parents can do whatever they want. So I'm not partial to, public school systems, private school systems, charter schools, homeschools. I think we all face the same problem. It doesn't matter, right? So I always think about it in terms of the environment that a child is going to grow up in and be educated in. That's how this is my framework for this thought process. And when you think about traditional school systems, and, really the basis of education for more than 100 years, it was not designed for your child. It wasn't designed for healthy children. It wasn't designed for curiosity and imaginative children. So the original school system was designed more than 100 years ago during the industrial era. And what it was designed for basically was to produce citizens that were valuable in a production society, right? And back then it was mostly factories. So when it was originally developed, it was based on the ideas of conformity, and specific tasks, right? The basic educational system was designed to kick out people that were foundationally literate, that could operate machinery and stand for long hours, maybe in a factory, right? Not even high intelligence at the beginning. The high intelligence was still reserved for university and the elites of society, right? Basic education was designed to kick out workers. That's what it was designed for. And the baseline for that is conformity, right? Rote learning, repetitive tasks. That's the design of traditional education. As we came to the end of the last century, 1960s, 70s, and 80s, that model was simply adopted and adapted a little bit to basically focus in on what we call the knowledge economy, right? So the worker changed from a factory to an office building. But we used the same system to train people to sit in chairs for long periods of time at a desk within an office structure and kick out, again, repetitive tasks with certain levels of education, basically producing maybe higher and higher states of knowledge-based work, right? But the whole system was still based on conformity, and it was redesigned where basically the pinnacle of everything was an entrance exam, right? So the pinnacle of what you do with education is basically designed for an SAT score, a GRE. It doesn't matter what it is, but it is a test score. And so throughout life, we began to sit kids down in chairs for long periods of time and push knowledge with the idea that they needed to test well. And the worse they tested, the more we decided they needed more pushing and more testing, more pushing, more testing, more pushing, more testing. So test, prep, test became the norm. Always test, prep, test, right? So basically, from the time this came all the way down to basically kindergarten, right? So we stopped the play and we moved to test, prep, test for first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade. And we created an environment where there's almost a linear progression straight up toward number one, the SAT, and number two, college entrance, and number three, a job, right? That's how we designed the entire system. And there's little room for play and imagination, curiosity, exploration, the arts, anything like that was basically removed from the system. In fact, in many elementary schools today, there's several I know of where the maximum play is 15 minutes. 15 minutes within an entire day for play. I mean, that's insane. That is antithetical to the development of a human being, and it's antithetical to the ideas of creativity, exploration. It just doesn't work. The conformity doesn't work, right? It's just not set up properly. And so the world that they're about to enter, everything changes. So the way I describe it, I do my best to describe it, is currently people with college degrees and PhDs and master's degrees are coming out, and there is no job, right? The job market is collapsing at what you would call the professional level because AI is busy transforming the way that work is done. And so there will be fewer and fewer requirements for people coming out with college degrees. So if the knowledge-based economy collapses at that level, then there is a big question about what is the purpose of spending 4 years in college, gathering a tremendous amount of debt, specifically for the idea of obtaining a job, because the job is no longer there. So then it begs the question, well, why do we spend 12, 18 years boxing people in to narrower and narrower points of knowledge, specifically to enter college, if the college is no longer important as well? So the scaffolding of our current model begins to collapse on itself, right? So we can think of this as, a great tragedy, or we can think of this as a great opportunity, because there are tons of studies and many people before me who have talked about the fact that this is not healthy for children, right? It's not the right environment for children to grow and develop. And that's been going on for a long time. Unfortunately, the system that was created was probably the most beneficial for society in general, because it did produce a steady flow of worker bees. It produced a steady flow of knowledge workers. It helped our society pay taxes. It helped the government, fund operations. But in the future, where they bring in AI and robotics to do a lot of this stuff, it displaces humans from that equation. So we can use this opportunity to basically retake childhood, redesign the entire framework, the entire infrastructure, based on the ideas of what it is to build a valuable child into a valuable, productive citizen, including things like empathy, kindness, creativity, imagination, value, and purpose. That should be the goal of the modern education system. It is not a job. And we have a tremendous opportunity right now to do that. And I think for the first time in a very long time, there is more reason to do that than to keep the status quo. And the challenge will be just A, to convince everybody that that is the inflection point we're standing at right now. And B, it's a gargantuan effort. There's a lot of time, energy, and investment and education in the current system. So it requires everyone to participate in the change.
Oh my goodness. Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't be more on board. As a former educator, seeing even how my kindergartners, the jobs that we were talking about, of like, when I grow up, I want to be a blank. It's like, okay, well, that doesn't even exist, And that was only like 10 years ago. So the idea that things are moving very quickly, and as you put it really well, like the repetitive tasks, it's like that's what robots can do really well, is the repetitive tasks, right? So the humanness of what we are, what we think, how we do that, how we connect, those are going to be the things that set us apart in the future, because there's no way that we're ever going to have the knowledge, as you mentioned, like the knowledge currency, right? We will never outpace AI and technology with that. Like, there's no way that we have that in our brain.
No,
So there's
and I
no
can,
way that we should be calling on that as like the primary source or drive.
yeah, and I can share that. I can share. One of the questions that comes up is, surely you can't be right, right? Surely robots can't replace everything, and the true answer is there's a lot they can, right? So if you think about the world, I'm gonna explain a little bit about why we will not be competitive, right, with the world of AI from a traditional perspective, right? Traditional jobs. Um, it's already happening today, and I think most people are not quite aware of what's really happening. But AI at its best right now is already obtaining perfect scores on SATs, GREs. It can pass most exams that the highest level mathematicians can pass, which again is probably smarter than 80%, 90% of the general population. So it's already past that point, right? As it stands today, it's beating the world's best chess players. It's beating the world's best Go players. It is also um, you know, outperforming in 100 different ways the speed at which human beings can get work done, as an example. So we're already there. But let me explain the framework of the competition moving forward. Number one, AI has several advantages. Let's put it that way. And the first advantage is that our brains, unfortunately, are not meant to contain all the world's knowledge, right? There's only a certain amount of knowledge we retain, and at the same time, there's only a certain amount of knowledge that we actually use. And with AI, the large language models, one of the challenges is they are trained to contain all of the world's knowledge and to be able to use that knowledge at any particular time for any particular task, right? So, number one, their framework is probably better than ours for rote tasks and repetitive tasks, number one. Number two, um, AI is all being developed on what you call a hive brain or a swarm mentality. And what that means is that when one computer or one robot learns a task or a skill, all robots and all computers automatically learn that skill, right? It's very different than human beings, right? So if you're a chef in the city of Paris and you develop a fantastic dessert that nobody else has tried and everybody loves it, it could still take years for other chefs in other cities to learn and understand how to create that beautiful dessert and provide it to their customers, right? With robots and computers, it's instantaneous. The minute one robot chef learns how to make that pastry, all robot chefs know how to make that pastry throughout the world. So there's the second advantage, right, over what we traditionally think of human capabilities. The third one is these crazy iterative loops that they're developing right now with technology, which means that they're not only designed to learn fast, but they are designed to iterate fast, which means they are designed to try, fail, try again. They are designed with monitoring as a basic core of their function. So while they're trying, they're monitoring the outcome constantly, right? And as they're monitoring the outcome, they're making notes and deciding on changes instantaneously. So they try, they understand what worked or didn't work, they immediately iterate to a change, and they immediately do it again. And they do this over and over and over again, for the basic concept of perfection. And the challenge is we want to do that as human beings, but we're probably not going to be able to do that as fast, right, as computers and AI can do. And the last piece of it is that it's cheaper, right? So when you think of traditional companies and the cost structures that companies will face, AI is cheaper than basically a human employee in many ways. So when you take in all those factors combined, what ends up happening in the real world is that a company that adopts with AI is going to be a formidable company, and the companies that don't adapt with that type of firepower will lose the race, right? So that is unfortunately very, very, very tough for all of us as human beings. So what really remains for the world of humans is the world of creativity and value. And that will show itself in a couple ways. One, do we have the ability to create something of value that doesn't exist in the world, right? That's one way that we will add value to the world as a human being. Number two, it is going back to human connection, is do we have the ability to offer something to human beings that they just simply prefer over AI, computers, and robots? Meaning the desire for human connection, the desire for another human being to provide value to the community, to you personally. So that the bastions of human capability are going to be really unique value, really unique, different thinking, and human connection. Those are the two things that we have to start helping human beings understand how to live that life for the coming generation.
Yeah, I think we've talked about kind of both sides of things, right? Like we've talked about like our personal and consumer life where, as parents, what are they seeing at home? What are they experiencing when they go to the grocery store or a restaurant or, maybe even at the doctor's office or the dentist's office, right? Like it's everywhere that you might need to go personally. And then it's also in the educational part and like the job, like where are we going to do, like, what is our vocation? And so like my perspective right now as a mom is I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm listening to all of this and I'm like, I have no idea. What do I do? Like, how do I help my kids right now? Like, what do I need to be looking for like their education, or what do I need to be trying differently at home? And, when do I actually start all this? Like, what age
Yeah.
is my 10-year-old too far gone now? Or do I need to start when they're born? Like, tell me a little bit more, like, give me a little bit more context for like, where should my mindset be right now as a parent? What ages are like, should we focus on, given the speed of how quickly everything is moving?
Yeah, I think the first flip, that is honestly the most difficult part, is simply changing your mindset about what their world looks like, right? So first and foremost, the realization that what we know and what we grew up with is irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant. So if you can do that as a parent, you've passed the first test, right? You've made the first step, right? The second thing is understanding what that world looks like, right? And I think that, again, the hardest thing for all parents is to erase the mindset of what we know and say what will be, right? So you have to focus on that constantly. The minute you begin to focus on that, unfortunately, you become obsessed with the question that you're asking me, right? Is, oh my God, this is the point. The job is no longer the foundation of human existence. That is the toughest point, right? We are so aligned with that thinking for the last 3-4 generations. I am a doctor. I am perhaps a lawyer. I work at Costco. That is our entire framework and foundation, right? So a lot of what we train our children to do, unfortunately, is really a linear path, right? We say, okay, if I'm really worried about my child, I'm going to make sure they're getting good grades. I'm going to make sure that they kill the SAT score. I'm going to make sure they get into a good college, a university. I'm going to make sure they get a good job. That is our entire framework. So the second flip is really to say, oh my God, that's not really important anymore. It's certainly not important for a child who is 5 right now.
Mm.
It's certainly not important for a child who's 10. And I'll tell you why. The first generation of disruption is coming within 5 years, right? The second generation will be 10 to 20 years. And so if your child is 5, we're really addressing what happens when they're 25, right? Like that's the paradigm shift. So the paradigm shift is when they're 25, nothing we do today is the same. Nothing, right? You're literally talking about AI as a substrate of everything in humanity. And then on top of that, robotics and physical extensions of AI are ubiquitous everywhere within 20 years, right? So think about that framework. So we're no longer training for a job. What we're training for is a world that's incredibly fast, changes on a dime, where we don't worry about jobs because the robot next to you can actually do any job and probably multiple jobs simultaneously, right? They're saying that all of us have robots. Well, fantastic, right? But what do you do with a robot, right? For existence, right? Human beings were simply not made to stand around and do nothing for the majority of their life. And if you listen to the longevity talks, they're saying that our children are likely to live to 120, 130 years old. So you're talking about possibly 100-year paradigm for our children, right? Think about how crazy that is. You're talking about the life of your 5-year-old in the year 2125, right? So how do we design children for that? Well, predictability is impossible at that speed, right? We actually don't know what's going to happen. So we're designing our kids to be incredibly resilient because of change, incredibly adaptable because of change, incredibly creative, imaginative, innovative, because they're going to have to think differently in order to provide any value into the world, right? They can't just simply do what the robot next to them does or their friend next to them does because it's already being done, right? So the world is completely, the skill sets are completely different. That's the way I would say it, right? So you're trying to embed in your children from a very early age, hey, you need to be incredibly flexible. You have to have mental agility. You have to be able to adapt. You have to think about alternatives, right? And we need to build the framework around purpose, meaning our children will be the first generation where a job is not the foundation of who you are. That creates a very interesting proposition. They have to figure out purpose because without purpose, things like depression, anxiety, suicide, addiction, they're just all lined up perfectly, right? For no purpose, right? So we have to think in terms of purpose. How do I help my child develop an idea of purpose? And so from a very early age, we start to restructure, reframe everything we're doing based on play, curiosity, exploration, alternative thinking, and resilience, right? And I talk about these things in my book, and I'm actually developing a second book that really goes with trying to provide parents with as many ideas and tasks and activities and exercises that build these skill sets. But if you think about your time at home with a child or your time in school in the educational environments, we need to throw out the idea that math and science are the core. It's not the core. The robot next to you will do all the math and science you want to do. I'm a huge believer, number one, that literacy is still the foundation of everything. So the biggest advocate in the world for literacy. And it is the foundation, in my opinion, of all further learning. So we need to become tremendous literacy advocates. You know, the Gutenberg press is like, 500 years old? I simply don't understand at this point why we would struggle with literacy at all. It's so widely available to us. We need to dedicate the time and energy to making sure they are highly literate and able to read, right? Regardless of what computer, regardless of what capabilities AI has. If we don't have the literacy foundation, we likely won't have the imaginative foundation, we won't have the creative foundations, and we won't have the critical thinking foundations without literacy. Math and science begin to go to the back of the line to all the other skill sets, right? Imagine saying that to a group of educators today. Imagine saying that to school systems today. the last 20 years of STEM is secondary. That's a hard pill to swallow for most people, right? But it is. And why is it important? It's because we only have so much time with our children, right? We only have so much time within a classroom or basically pushing the ideas of education. Number one, play needs to come back. And everybody knows that play needs to come back. So the research shows that children up until the age of 10 need like 2 to 3 hours of play every day. And they need unstructured play because within play is the foundations of social learning skills. They learn so much through play, right? So if we're going to stop everything we're doing and put 2 to 3 hours of play as the center of focus in the day, wow, now we only have a few more hours of time to focus on what we consider to be learning, right? And if all that time is focused on math and science, we don't have time for the more important skill sets. So now we have to develop patterns of, okay, so what does imagination training look like? What does curiosity training look like? How much exploration can I build into my child's day? How in the world do I teach my kid alternative thinking, right? They come up upon a point of stickiness where they're struggling. And we all do this. We're struggling with what to do next or what idea to come up with next. And the more we train them to come up with idea after idea after idea, the more capable they are of doing that throughout life. But if we spend no time training them to come up with alternative ideas, no time training them to be creative, they're simply not creative. They simply don't have the capacity. The brain is not built for alternative thinking. So the challenge we're faced with is readdressing everything with those things are the priority in life. That's the priority for future generations. Alternative thinking. And the last thing I'll say about this in terms of the environment is parents, educators need to be passionate about social skills and human connection. Right in front of us, Jessica, you mentioned this. We all see this, right? You walk into a room, restaurant, Starbucks, it doesn't matter. And the entire room is staring down into a phone.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's a very, very dangerous setup for society. So children today that were raised after 2010, 2012, they are way more comfortable texting than talking. They are way more comfortable dealing with the wider world of human beings through a portal, through a social media site, through their phone, through their computer, than they are approaching and talking to another human being. Okay? So the danger with that is with the power and convenience of artificial intelligence, you may never have to leave the house. Never. You can basically sit on a cell phone or computer, order your food, your entertainment, your house is paid for, everything is done for you. There's a robot in your house cleaning, and you literally might have the ability to sit and stare into a screen or a computer for 18 hours a day. But that is very dangerous for society. So what I'm a huge advocate for is whatever learning environments we develop, there has to be human connection as part of it.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't be more on board. As you described that of sitting in front of a screen, the image from, I'm not sure if you've seen the movie Wall-E, but when all of the adults literally are just right there and they're like, oh, new color released. And they're like, boom. And then they like all their outfits change the color. It's like, they're literally all floating around and they're not talking to each other. And then the screens come down and then that's when it's like, oh my gosh, what is actually happening? Like how have we gotten to this place? And then I think that this part of human connection, even at the grocery stores, right? One of the things that we do with our kids, just as maybe like a tip or like a place to start for parents that are listening into this conversation, we have this sort of like mantra. It's like, be mindful of others. Like, and that means being aware of where we are in the physical space, where other people are in the physical space. Maybe also like emotion check, right? Like if someone's sad or is someone aggravated or agitated, like how can we then either intervene or like work around to make sure that we're safe? All of those things that we want to teach them be mindful of other humans. Like, what is our human experience and what is other people's human experience? And how can we connect or be mindful of that to meet people where they are in that moment? Um, and so with that, I want to just ask one more question, which is for families, parents that are listening in, educators that are listening in today, what is the main key takeaway or action step that they need to take today or tomorrow with the kids in their life? What would you encourage them to do?
So, of course, I'm going to say, read the book, right? I'm going to
Yeah.
say read the book. Yeah, the key takeaway is that there's two takeaways.
Yeah, yeah.
The number one thing is that parents have to recognize the world is changing. They have to recognize this. But the B side, the flip side is we actually have the ability to do something about it. But AI is so fast, and we're basically going to wake up in about 3-4 years. And the world will be sort of unrecognizable in certain ways, right? It's a very fast time frame. And the displacement is going to be huge. We will wake up in a world we kind of don't understand, we may not recognize from a human perspective. So for me, a lot of people ask the question, have we lost our teenagers? Well, they're going to have the toughest time, right? The toughest time for people will be people between the ages of, say, 15 and 35. Because they were trained for a world that basically is not really going to exist, right? So they were trained for a world of jobs and things like that. And they're going to come out expecting jobs. And within 10 years, the world will radically shift underneath their feet. It's a very tough thing for them. And they're not mentally prepared, right? They're not mentally prepared. They haven't spent years thinking about how you develop purpose and how you develop value to other human beings. They've spent years trying to figure out how to get a job. Yeah. So what I'm trying to urge parents just diligently is we can do something about this, but you have to start today because it's so fast. And we have to start very young because it's an entirely different mental framework, right? So we didn't talk much about the ages of 5 to 10, but the ages of 5 to 10 are incredibly important in this um, formula. And it's because the brain during the first 5 years, it creates an explosion of connections and neurons and all these fantastic things. And what we're born into by the time we're 3 to 5 is a brain that is alive and it basically absorbs everything around it constantly, right? And there's no need for us to sit a child down and try and teach them because they're learning constantly through experience. They experience the world around them and their brain sucks it all in. It's an amazing process. But what happens is the brain actually has a counter process that begins at 5 years old. And it's called synaptic pruning. And what the brain is doing is the brain is basically literally trimming down those connections for the purpose of efficiency. We're telling the brain exactly what we needed to do and what focus we wanted to pay attention to. So as parents, that time frame is incredibly important. And what we do today is we do everything wrong in terms of imagination, curiosity, and development. We sit them down, we send them to school, we tell them to sit and learn, sit and learn, sit and learn. And during that time frame, we kill the very core of imagination and creativity. So why I'm such a huge advocate and why I'm trying to get this message out is start early. The most critical time is the ages of 5 to 10. And if we have done the work, if we have done everything we can to build imagination, creativity, and agency, and preserved as many of those connections as possible, by the time they hit that age of 12, 13, 14, and they start to deal with a whole new set of circumstances, right? Puberty and peer pressures, and they really are, the world they will inherit will require technology. There is no escaping it. So we want to keep them in an environment that's about exploding creativity and human connection until it's absolutely necessary to begin engaging the world in the technology that exists. If we've done that successfully, hopefully we have built a fortress for them. We've built a mental fortress for them that they are capable of competing, of thriving, of building purpose and building value in the world they're going to encounter. So the urgency that I'm asking all parents for is to understand the world that's coming, because that's the world your children will have to live in. And B, be aggressive about your approach. Be aggressive about protecting your children in the age of artificial intelligence.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. My mind is going to probably be like obsessed with this for the next, a few years at least, because my kids are still very
Yeah.
young. So it's still keeping it top of mind. I just want to thank you for the conversation, the time, the insights, and for reminding parents that like the love and the presence and the intentionality still will matter more than any tool or trend that's coming their way. To our listeners, if today's episode resonated with you, be sure to check the show notes to learn more about his work, books, and the Wylde Scott project. If you're parenting kids under 10, you're not, you're not alone. There's a whole bunch of us out here. Consider this your invitation not to panic, but rather to kind of shift focus and to engage. Because the future isn't just something that our kids are inheriting. It's, as mentioned today, it's something that we're actively shaping, building every single day in our homes and society as a whole. So until next time, remember that raising humans matters more than raising achievers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jessica.